Sometimes, it only takes one bark to change the world. It's easy to walk through life thinking monsters only live in nightmares, that the worst things happen far away to people we'll never know. But the truth is, darkness doesn't hide in shadows. It walks among us, wears suits, sits in boardrooms, and smiles like a friend. And sometimes, it takes a hero who doesn't wear a badge or carry a gun. Sometimes, it takes the sharp nose and unwavering loyalty of a dog named Luca. This isn't just a story about a crime. It's a story about the lives we don't see, the ones trapped in cages we don't talk about, and the quiet power of courage that refuses to stay silent. It's about the thin line between hope and despair, and how a single, stubborn bark in the middle of an airport became the crack that shattered a nightmare. Let me tell you what happened when the world stopped for just a moment, and one dog wouldn't let it go back to normal. It was supposed to be just another ordinary afternoon at the airport. Travelers lined up, eyes glued to flight boards, luggage wheels squeaking across polished tiles. A blend of airport chatter and the soft hum of engines preparing for takeoff filled the air. Mothers wrangled kids, businessmen tapped away on laptops, and tourists balanced coffee cups while searching for boarding gates. The perfect picture of routine, of safety, until it wasn't. Then it happened. A bark, sharp, sudden, feral, cut through the hum like a bullet through glass. People turned, startled. Some froze, their faces tight with confusion. Others scrambled backward as a blur of black and tan muscle shot across the terminal floor. Luca, the K9, ears pinned, tail stiff, teeth bared, sprinted toward a young woman in a bright red dress. Her eyes widened in panic, her hands clutching a small purse to her chest. She screamed, a sharp, ragged sound, as Luca lunged, teeth tearing through fabric with brutal precision. In an instant, the scene unraveled into chaos. Luggage tumbled, coffee cups crashed, and a chorus of gasps filled the terminal. "Get that dog off her," someone shouted. Phones were raised, recording every second. Shouts bounced off the high ceilings as airport security raced in. And there, in the heart of the chaos, Officer Mike Reynolds stood frozen for a split second, eyes narrowing as he processed the impossible. Luca, his partner, his loyal, steady partner, attacking a woman out of nowhere. But Luca wasn't just any dog. Luca had never failed a mission. Luca didn't bark for no reason. The woman stumbled backward, her dress torn at the waist, revealing something small, something glinting under the harsh airport lights. A plastic bag, no bigger than a candy bar, and in it, red, bright red, liquid, blood. Time stopped. Mike's breath hitched. The woman screamed again, her voice shrill, desperate now. "It's not mine. It's not mine," she cried, hands raised in defense, as if the words themselves would form a shield. Luca growled low, deep in his chest, a sound that made Mike's stomach twist. If you're hooked by this story, don't forget to subscribe to Heroes for Animals, your channel for real-life hero dogs and their incredible stories. Because sometimes, the smallest bark leads to the biggest rescues. Mike snapped back into focus, adrenaline flooding his veins. He barked commands. Secure the perimeter. Clear the area. His team moved, practiced, precise. The woman dropped to her knees, sobbing, holding what was left of her dress together, eyes darting, voice trembling. "Please, I didn't do anything. That dog's crazy. He's gone crazy." Mike didn't buy it. Not for a second. He crouched beside the bag on the floor, his heart pounding so hard it echoed in his ears. He didn't need to open it. The smell hit him first, coppery, metallic, unmistakable. Human blood. He glanced up at Luca, whose body was stiff, his gaze fixed, his breath a low, controlled snarl. Luca wasn't just alert. Luca was on the edge. "Who are you?" Mike demanded, his voice steady but firm as he turned to the woman. Her eyes were wide, shimmering with tears, her skin pale. "I'm nobody," she whispered, shaking her head. "I'm just a student. I didn't do anything." Mike's eyes flickered to the suitcase by her side. Luca's nose twitched, head lowering, tail stiffening like a loaded spring. Then the bark came again, louder this time, urgent, almost angry. He scratched at the suitcase, claws scraping against the hard shell. Mike's gut clenched. Something was off. Way off. He nodded to his team. Check the bag now. A TSA officer in gloves unzipped the case. Clothes, makeup, books, the usual. But Luca wasn't buying it. He barked again, a deep, guttural sound, and began to claw at the lining. Mike moved in, using a utility knife to slice open the inner seam, and froze. There, hidden under the thin layer of fabric, wrapped in a plastic sheath, was a human finger. Small, delicate, nails painted a soft pink, perfectly manicured. The world seemed to tilt. "Oh my God!" someone whispered. A woman in the crowd screamed. Phones flashed, recording, clicking, as a circle of fear tightened around them. The woman in the red dress didn't move. Her breath hitched, her lips quivered, and then, without warning, she bolted. "Stop her," Mike shouted, but Luca was already on it. He lunged, tackling her to ground, pinning her down with a fierce, protective snarl. Mike was on top of them in seconds, snapping cuffs on her wrists. She fought, sobbing, screaming, kicking her heels against the floor. "You don't understand. You can't. If they find out, they'll kill me. They'll kill us all." "Who?" Mike demanded, but she only sobbed harder, her voice dissolving into incoherent cries. Luca stood, chest heaving, eyes locked on the suitcase. Mike's hand shook slightly as he picked up the finger, holding it under the harsh lights. A fingerprint would be easy, but a fingerprint wouldn't tell the whole story. Not yet. The woman's ID said her name was Jessica Nguyen, age 25, a graduate student on vacation. But as the team ran her information, something didn't add up. The passport was valid, the name real, but the photo was slightly off, the fingerprints no match. And the blood on the floor, the severed finger, none of it made sense. Mike looked at Luca, whose eyes stayed locked on the woman, unblinking. There was something here, something far darker than anyone in this terminal could have imagined. And this was just the beginning. Mike Reynolds had been in law enforcement long enough to trust his gut, and right now his gut was screaming. Inside the small, sterile airport interrogation room, the air felt heavier than it should. Fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead, casting a harsh glare over the woman in the red dress. Jessica Nguyen, according to her passport, but her hands trembled, her breathing shallow, eyes darting like a trapped animal. Mike sat across from her, arms crossed, watching every twitch, every swallow. Luca lay by his side, eyes locked on her like a silent sentinel, his ears perked, head slightly tilted, as if he was listening to something no one else could hear. "You got one chance to tell me the truth," Mike said, voice low, steady. "What's in the bag, and why the hell were you carrying it?" She didn't answer, just stared at the table, lips pressed into a thin line, her knuckles white where they gripped the chair's edge. Mike leaned forward, dropping his voice just above a whisper. "You're not just some random girl in a red dress, are you?" Her shoulders shook, barely perceptible. A single tear slipped down her cheek. Luca let out a soft, rumbling growl that cut through the tension like a blade. Mike's phone buzzed, an incoming call from TSA Command. With a curt nod, he stepped into the hallway, leaving the door ajar. "Mike, we ran her prints through every database we have. No matches, no visas, no prior entries, no credit history. She's a ghost." Mike's stomach dropped. He looked back into the room at the woman's hunched figure, her breath ragged, her fingers fidgeting nervously. A ghost in a red dress. "And the bag?" he asked a beat. "That blood? It's human, fresh, less than 24 hours old." Mike's pulse quickened. "And the finger?" A long pause on the line. "It's a woman's. DNA is being rushed, but early analysis shows it's from a living person, not a cadaver. Living. That word hit Mike like a punch to the chest. Someone out there was missing a finger. Someone who might still be alive. He hung up, took a breath, and re-entered the room. The woman didn't look up. Luca shifted, ears pricked, the faintest whine in his throat. "Who are you, really?" Mike asked again, softer this time. The woman finally spoke, voice barely audible. "If I tell you, they'll kill me." "Who's they?" Mike pressed, but she clammed up, shaking her head violently, tears spilling now, her whole body trembling like a leaf in a storm. Mike exhaled through his nose, frustration bubbling just beneath the surface. He paced the room, mind racing. This wasn't random. This wasn't coincidence. Something deeper was at play, and it was slipping through his fingers. Luca's head snapped to the side, nostrils flaring. He let out a sharp bark, then pawed at the fabric of the woman's torn dress. "Luca, down," Mike commanded, but the dog didn't listen. Instead, Luca began nudging the woman's side, almost urgently, like he was trying to tell Mike something. Mike's eyes narrowed. He stepped forward, inspecting the dress more closely. The seam along the waistline had an odd bulge, barely noticeable. "Turn around," he ordered. "No, please." But Mike didn't wait. With practiced hands, he tugged at the fabric, revealing a thin, almost invisible pocket sewn into the lining. Inside, a small slip of paper, damp with sweat and blood, tumbled out. Mike's heart pounded as he unfolded it. Scrawled in shaky handwriting were the words, "Warehouse, room 16. Don't trust them." Mike's breath hitched. His gaze snapped to the woman. Her eyes were wide, terrified. She shook her head in tiny, rapid motions, mouthing a silent plea. "Don't say it out loud." Before Mike could react, a voice crackled through his radio. "Reynolds, we need you now. There's been a breach in security footage from this terminal." Mike's jaw clenched. He turned to the woman. "You stay put. Don't move." As he stepped into the hallway, Luca at his side, Mike's mind raced. A ghost with a fake ID, a severed finger, human blood, and now a cryptic note. This wasn't a one-off incident. This was the tip of something bigger. Much bigger. Luca bumped his leg, a low warning growl vibrating in his chest. Mike glanced down at him, a chill running through his veins. Luca never growled, unless he sensed danger. He turned back toward the room just in time to see the woman slump forward, her body going limp, her head hitting the table with a dull thud. Mike lunged back inside, checking her pulse, faint, but there. Her skin was clammy, her breath shallow. "Medics!" he barked into his radio. As the medical team rushed in, Luca's nose hovered over the table. He sniffed, then looked up at Mike, his eyes sharp, alert. That's when Mike noticed it. Underneath the woman's sleeve, a thin, almost surgical scar on her forearm, a faint raised line, barely visible. He leaned closer, his breath catching in his throat. It wasn't just a scar. It was a number, a tattoo, a code, a human barcode. Mike stepped back, his mind reeling. Who the hell was this woman? And what the hell had they just stumbled into? Mike's heart raced as he stared at the faint barcode etched into the woman's skin. It wasn't like any regular tattoo. Too clinical, too precise, like something stamped rather than inked by choice. "What the hell are you?" he muttered under his breath, barely audible. Luca sat next to him, tail stiff, ears high, his breathing shallow, almost matching Mike's own rising pulse. The air felt colder in that tiny room, like the walls themselves had absorbed the shock. The paramedics worked quickly, checking the woman's vitals, preparing her for transport. One of them, a young EMT with shaved head, glanced up at Mike. "BP's dropping. She's in shock. We need to move her now." Mike nodded, stepping aside as they loaded her onto the stretcher. Luca kept his eyes locked on her, as if she might vanish the second he blinked. As they wheeled her down the hallway, Mike followed close behind, his mind spinning. A severed finger, blood in the dress, a hidden note, and now a barcode tattoo on her arm. Something wasn't adding up. "Reynolds." Mike turned. It was Captain Harris, mid-50s, gruff voice, salt and pepper mustache, a no-nonsense guy who'd seen his fair share of messed-up cases. "Got a minute?" Harris asked, his tone tight. "Barely," Mike replied, glancing toward the departing stretcher. Harris leaned in, lowering his voice. "We ran a partial from that finger. Preliminary hit from the missing persons database. It's a woman, Lily Tran, reported missing in Houston 3 weeks ago." Mike's stomach twisted. Houston? That was over 1,000 miles away. "That's not the weird part," Harris added. Her family reported she'd been working as a nanny for a Vietnamese family. No red flags, but she disappeared after a job interview at some fancy private firm. No trace since then. A sinking feeling gnawed at Mike's gut. He rubbed his temples, trying to piece it all together. Anything on a woman in red? Harris shook his head. Nothing. It's like she doesn't exist. Mike's eyes narrowed. Or maybe she's not supposed to. Luca nudged his leg again, then let out a low, steady whine. Mike followed the dog's gaze back to the small evidence table in the room, the torn red dress. Mike walked over and picked it up carefully, holding it up to the light. It looked ordinary, cheap fabric, off the rack, but something about the stitching along the hem caught his eye. Luca, what do you smell? Luca sniffed the fabric, his nose wrinkling. He let out a quiet, short bark, then sat, eyes locked on the seam. Mike's fingers traced the hem. There, barely visible, a small, almost imperceptible bump. He reached for a pair of tweezers, pulling gently. A thread came loose, revealing a thin strip of plastic woven into the lining. He unfolded it carefully, revealing a tiny chip. Harris leaned in. Is that RFID? Mike nodded slowly. Yeah, but why the hell is it in a dress? He pulled out his phone, scanning the chip with a field reader app they use for cargo inspections. The screen flickered. A string of coordinates popped up. Mike's chest tightened. Location data, he whispered. Harris looked over his shoulder. Where does it lead? Mike tapped the map icon. A satellite image loaded. A warehouse, middle of nowhere, near the outskirts of town, off an industrial road most people wouldn't even notice. Mike's mouth went dry. Luca let out a sharp bark, as if to say, We have to go. Mike nodded, already moving. Let's roll. The drive out was tense. Mike sat behind the wheel, fingers gripping the steering wheel tight, his knuckles white. Harris rode shotgun, scanning the map. Abandoned property, Harris muttered, scrolling through city records. Listed under a shell company. No activity for years, but it's been leased recently by a medical supply firm. Mike shot him a look. Medical supplies. That's convenient. They pulled off the main road, gravel crunching under the tires. The sun was starting to set, casting long shadows over the empty fields and rusted fences. The warehouse loomed ahead, its corrugated metal walls stained with age. A few windows boarded up. Mike cut the engine. The air felt heavier out here, too quiet. Luca shifted in the back seat, ears perked, nose pressed to the window. Mike loaded his weapon, checked the chamber, then clipped his badge to his belt. Ready? Harris nodded, drawing his sidearm. They approached the warehouse cautiously, boots crunching on the gravel. Luca stayed low, sniffing the ground, his tail straight out like an arrow. At the side entrance, Mike tested the handle. Locked. He nodded to Harris, who stepped back, aimed, and fired a single shot into the lock. The door swung open with a rusty groan. The air inside was stale cold and smelled faintly of bleach and something else, metallic, sharp. They moved in slowly, flashlights cutting through the gloom. Rows of shelving units lined the walls, stacked with boxes labeled medical supplies in neat, printed font. But Luca wasn't interested in the shelves. He veered off, nose to the ground, pulling toward the back. Mike followed, heart hammering. At the far end of the warehouse, behind a false wall, they found it a small, locked room. Mike's flashlight beam swept over the door, a keypad lock, high security. Great. Luca let out a deep, guttural growl, his hackles raised. Mike's pulse spiked. He motioned Harris to cover him, then stepped forward. He took a deep breath, bracing for whatever was behind that door. Harris cracked it tight, grim grin. You ready for this? Mike nodded once. Let's see what secrets they're hiding. With a deep breath, Mike entered the code, one of the oldest tricks in the book. He punched in the coordinates from the chip. The lock beeped green. The door clicked open. And what they saw inside wasn't what they expected at all. The lock clicked open with mechanical will that seemed to echo through the still air, each second stretching like taffy. Mike's heart was pounding in his chest, as if it were trying to escape. Harris stood beside him, weapon drawn, jaw clenched tight. Luca was pressed against Mike's leg, a low growl vibrating in his throat, muscles coiled like a loaded spring. Mike pushed the door open. It was colder inside, the air sharp and sterile, like a hospital operating room. The space was small, maybe the size of a two-car garage, with concrete walls, dim overhead lights, and a faint hum of electronics in the background. But what caught Mike's attention wasn't the cold or the smell of antiseptic. It was what was inside. Rows of metal shelves lined the walls, and on each shelf were boxes sealed tight and labeled with numbers in bold black ink. 2210, 2205, 2207. The same sequence from the barcode tattoo on the woman's arm. Mike felt his stomach tighten. At the far end of the room, under a single hanging light, was a gurney, and on that gurney, Harris whispered, lowering his gun slightly, Jesus. A woman, young, maybe early 20s, pale, motionless. Wires and tubes snaked from her body into machines that beeped softly, a slow, steady rhythm. Her wrists and ankles were strapped down with thick leather cuffs, skin bruised beneath the restraints. Her face was gaunt, eyes closed, lips slightly parted, as if she were frozen in mid-breath. Luca whimpered softly, nudging forward. His nose barely brushed her foot before Mike gently pulled him back. Who is she? Harris muttered, stepping closer. Mike scanned the scene. For bags marked with complex medical jargon, an oxygen tank, monitors displaying vitals. The woman was alive, barely. Mike's eyes fell on a clipboard at the end of the bed. The top sheet read, Subject 2205, liver extraction scheduled. Priority client, soul. His breath caught in his throat. This wasn't just trafficking. This was an organized, systematic operation, selling human beings for parts, like they were auto salvage. His fists clenched, rage bubbling under the surface. Luca growled again, low and steady, and Mike noticed the dog's gaze fixed on a small vent near the floor. Mike crouched, flashlight beam cutting through the shadows, and peered inside. A faint sound, a muffled cough. Mike's blood ran cold. He dropped flat, pressing his ear to the vent. There was again, faint, weak, a voice. Help, please. Mike's eyes widened. Harris, we got more. They worked fast, following Luca's lead as he sniffed, barked, and pawed at the wall. Hidden behind a sliding panel they pried open, they found a narrow passage leading to a sub-basement. The smell hit them first, a mix of sweat, fear, and something sterile, chemical. Mike's flashlight swept across the space, revealing rows of cages. Cages, each one barely big enough to hold a person. And inside, Mike's stomach turned. 6 women, all young, all in various states of health. Some unconscious, others awake but weak, eyes glassy and hollow. One girl stirred as a light hit her face, maybe 19 or 20. Her lips cracked, face bruised, hair matted. She looked up, dazed, and then her eyes widened, locking onto Luca. She started crying. Oh, God, it's really happening. Someone came. Luca pressed forward, tail wagging low, licking her hand gently, as if trying to comfort her. Mike's voice cracked as he whispered into his radio. We need backup medical everything, now. The team worked quickly, cutting restraints, checking pulses. Harris muttered under his breath, This is a damn nightmare. Mike felt sick. The girl in the red dress, the one who started all this, wasn't just a random suspect. She was part of this hell. Somehow, a cog in machine they hadn't even begun to understand. He turned back toward the room upstairs where the woman on the gurney lay. The clipboard, the codes, the sterile efficiency of it all. Who was behind this? His radio crackled. Reynolds, we got a situation. A voice from dispatch called in. The woman from the airport, Jessica Nguyen. She's gone. Mike froze. Gone. Disappeared from the hospital 10 minutes ago. Security cameras went black. Mike's blood ran cold. They weren't just running an operation. They had reach, resources, power. Someone had pulled her out under their noses, like she was never there. Luca let out a sharp, urgent bark, snapping Mike out of the daze. Let's move. Harris, secure these girls. I'm going after her. Harris grabbed his arm. Mike, wait. We don't know who we're dealing with yet. Mike stared at him, jaw tight, fists clenched. That's exactly why we have to go before they disappear again. Luca barked, as if in agreement, his tail stiff, his body tense. Mike took a breath, heart pounding, and stepped toward the door. The warehouse felt like it was closing in, the smell of fear lingering in the air, thick and heavy. This wasn't over. It was just the beginning. Mike gripped the steering wheel tighter than he meant to as the SUV sped to the darkened streets, the city's neon glow blurring past. Luca sat rigid in the back seat, staring out the window, ears perked, nostrils flaring. Every bump in the road rattled like a warning shot in Mike's chest. Jessica Nguyen, if that was even her real name, was gone, vanished from the hospital under their noses, as if the ground itself had swallowed her whole. And the girls they'd found in that basement, those cages. Mike's pulse spiked every time he replayed it in his mind. He glanced over at Harris in the passenger seat. The older man was silent, jaw tight, eyes narrowed, scanning the GPS like he was willing it to reveal answers. Security footage went dark for exactly 3 minutes, Harris muttered. That's not some random glitch. That's military-grade interference. Mike nodded grimly. Whoever we're dealing with, they're not small time. His phone buzzed. Dispatch. He put on speaker. Reynolds, we've got a lead. The RFID chip you found in the dress. It just pinged again. Somewhere it shouldn't. Mike's grip tightened. Where? A beat. Downtown. Medical research facility. Private. Goes by the name Novagen Biotech. Registered as a biomed startup. But their financials are all over the place. Money flowing in from offshore accounts tied to shell corporations. Mike shot Harris a look. That can't be a coincidence. Harris muttered, No way. Mike's gut twisted. He leaned into the radio. Send units, but tell in a hold position until we get there. Luca and I will go in first. Copy that. Be careful, Reynolds. Mike's foot slammed the gas. Novagen Biotech looked like any other glass and steel corporate building in the heart of the city. Sleek logo, modern facade, lobby lights glowing soft and warm, like a welcome mat. But Mike's instincts told him it was all facade. They pulled up a block away, killing the lights. Harris stayed in the SUV, radio in hand, while Mike leashed Luca and approached on foot. The streets were quiet, almost too quiet for this time of night. Mike's boots crunched softly on the pavement as he and Luca moved toward the side entrance. Luca's body language shifted, his tail straight, his ears locked forward, nose twitching fast. He let out a soft whine, his pace quickening. Easy, buddy, Mike whispered. At the side door, Mike tried the handle. Locked, as expected. He leaned in, examining the keypad, high-tech biometric scanner integrated. Mike exhaled slowly, watching Luca. The dog's gaze stayed glued to the door, his posture stiff, as if waiting for permission to charge. Mike pulled a small device from his pocket, an RFID reader. He hovered it near the keypad. A green light flashed. The chip from the dress had been the key. With a click, the lock disengaged. Mike's pulse hammered in his ears. He opened the door slowly, Luca slipping inside first like a shadow, his steps silent on the polished tile floor. Inside, the facility hummed with quiet energy, computers blinking, the faint buzz of fluorescent lights overhead. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic, like a hospital trying too hard to be clean. They moved deeper, past empty reception desks and glass-walled offices. Mike's flashlight beam danced over lab equipment. Whiteboards filled with molecular diagrams, half-drunk coffee cups. It all looked normal, until it didn't. In the back, behind security door marked Restricted Access, Luca froze. His nose twitched, a soft growl rumbling deep in his chest. Mike's breath caught. He reached for the door handle. Locked. Swiped his RFID reader. Nothing. Luca let out a sharp bark, almost a snap. Mike stepped back, scanning the frame. Then he saw it. Fresh scuff marks on the floor, faint, but there. A hidden hinge. A false wall. Mike's pulse spiked. He pressed on the side panel. Nothing. Then, on instinct, he tapped the floor with his boot. A hollow sound. He crouched, running his fingers along the baseboard. A click. The panel slid open. Behind it, an elevator shaft. No buttons, no signage. Mike stared at it for a beat. Looks like we're going down the rabbit hole, buddy. Luca's ears twitched, tail low and steady, his body language clear. Let's go. Mike took a deep breath and stepped inside. The floor vibrated under his boots as a hidden elevator hummed to life, descending into the unknown. The door slid open with a soft chime. The air was different down here. Colder, sterile, and thick with an underlying metallic scent that clung to the back of Mike's throat. They stepped out into a dimly lit hallway. Concrete walls, no windows. Surveillance cameras dotted the ceiling, each one swiveling slowly, silently. Luca's nose hit the floor instantly. He moved like a predator, body low, weaving back and forth as he followed an invisible trail. At the end of the hall, they reached a heavy metal door, a single keypad next to it blinking red. Mike tried the RFID reader again. The light flashed green. The door unlocked. Mike pushed it open. And there, in the center of a cold, sterile lab, was Jessica, strapped to a chair, arms pinned, eyes wild, electrodes dotting her temples. Her breathing was ragged, chest rising and falling in shallow bursts. A man stood over her, lab coat pristine, gloves on, face calm. He looked like a surgeon prepping for an operation. Except this wasn't an OR. This was an interrogation. Mike's voice cut through the room like a bullet. Step away from her now. The man barely flinched. Luca growled, low and menacing, teeth bared. The man turned slowly, his eyes cold, calculating. "You're early," he said, voice eerily calm. "I was expecting you later." Mike's finger tightened on the trigger. "Who are you?" The man smiled thinly. "Someone who understands that shadows don't bleed." Mike's stomach twisted. He had a name for this guy now, the doctor, and this nightmare was far from over. Mike didn't blink. The man in the lab coat, the doctor, as he called himself, stood tall, his expression calm, as if Mike's Glock wasn't pointed directly at his chest. The room buzzed with quiet dread, the kind of silence that follows a gunshot or precedes a scream. Jessica sat in a chair, trembling, her eyes wild with fear and exhaustion, her arms strapped down like she was part of some twisted science project. Electrodes on her temples beeped quietly, her breath shallow, ragged. Step away from her. Mike's voice was still, unflinching. The doctor smirked, tilting his head slightly. "You think you won something here, Officer Reynolds? You're just scratching the surface." Luca growled low, his body tense, tail straight, muscles coiled like a loaded spring. Mike could feel the heat radiating off the dog, the energy of an animal who knew, who felt the danger in his bones. "I won't ask again," Mike warned, his finger steady on the trigger. The doctor's eyes flicked to the gun, then to Luca, and finally to Jessica. "She's just a messenger," he said softly, almost like a confession. "You have no idea what's coming." Before Mike could react, the doctor moved fast, too fast for a man in his 50s. He reached for a button on the wall. Mike fired instinctively. The shot rang out, deafening in the small room. The doctor dropped, clutching his shoulder, blood seeping through his lab coat. Jessica screamed. Luca lunged, teeth bared, pinning the doctor to the ground in a snarl of fury. Mike rushed to Jessica's side, fumbling with the restraints. Her skin was cold, clammy, her eyes wide with terror. "It's okay. I've got you," Mike whispered, his voice rough but steady. He tore the straps loose, yanking the electrodes off her skin. Jessica slumped forward, sobbing into his shoulder. "They're still out there," she gasped between sobs. "They'll find us. They'll find all of us." Mike tightened his grip on her, his mind racing. Harris's voice crackled through the radio on Mike's belt. "Reynolds, what's your status?" "We've got her," Mike replied, breathless. "Send medical down, and a team to process this lab. We've got evidence. Lots of it." As backup poured in, Mike stepped back, watching his agents swarm the lab, cataloging everything. The computers, the files, the cages in the basement they hadn't even begun to process. Luca stood watch by the doctor, still growling low, the doctor's face twisted in pain. But there was something else in his expression, satisfaction. "This isn't over," he rasped, blood staining his teeth. "You can't stop what's coming." Mike stared at him, his pulse still racing. He wanted to demand answers, to rip the truth out of the man's mouth. But deep down, he knew the truth was bigger than one man. 2 days later, the press conference hit every major news network. The headlines were explosive. Human trafficking ring busted in underground medical lab. K9 hero Luca helps uncover global operation. Officer Reynolds and K9 Luca save lives. exposed dark web trade. The world watched in shock as details came to light. How women had been kidnapped, trafficked, and turned into living commodities. How Luca's nose, that single persistent bark at the airport, had cracked the case wide open. Mike sat in the back of the room during the press briefing, his suit rumpled, eyes heavy with exhaustion. Luca lay by his feet, tail thumping softly every time someone mentioned his name. Jessica was in protective custody, receiving medical and psychological care. The girls rescued from the warehouse were being reunited with their families, their stories slowly emerging. Stories of survival, of resilience, of unimaginable horror. The doctor was behind bars, facing federal charges. But even as the headlines praised the task force, Mike couldn't shake the nagging feeling in his gut. The doctor had said, "You're just scratching the surface." What did that mean? How many more doctors were out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the world to look the other way? That night, Mike sat on his porch, a cold beer in hand, the city lights flickering in the distance. Luca lay beside him, head resting on Mike's boot, breathing steady content. Mike reached down and scratched behind Luca's ears. "You're the real hero, buddy," he murmured. Luca's tail thumped softly, his eyes closing as if he understood. The world kept moving, planes taking off, people scrolling through their phones, kids riding bikes on sidewalks. Life continued because it had to, but in the quiet moments, when the noise died down and the darkness crept in, Mike knew there were still monsters out there. And he knew, without a doubt, that Luca would be ready. Thank you for sticking with us through this story. It's been a wild ride, hasn't it? Do you think we've truly uncovered the whole story? Or is there more lurking beneath the surface, waiting to be found